Well, I was the first sculptor to show 3D printed work.
Right. That's right. And that's a very important history that I think needs to be clarified.
The 3D printing was a big issue. It still is, but the problem with the work in the computer was how do you get it off the computer? And anything that's planar was easy because you could do unfold programs. But getting a curved shape off out of the computer without was basically impossible. So the 3D printing is a big part of this. And again, I was one of the first ones, and they actually Autodesk gave me. Well, actually, I'm sorry, you, you did the first 3D printing for me. I
Yes.
apologize for having, for a moment, forgotten that. But definitely when because you had that first, you had access to that powder.
Well, first because I started working for SIGGRAPH, and and then there was the Guerrilla Gallery that Dan Collins from ASU and the Prism Lab at the time, he engaged a lot of us early on, and all the 3D print companies started making these printers available to us. And I was newly hired at New York Institute of Technology, and I was able to convince them to spend the money because most of those printers were $750,000, $500,000 at least, and then suddenly there were $30,000 machines. Stratasys, of course, Z-Core, and 3D systems were the big ones. But the 3D systems were still very, very expensive. But they were more interesting in that they were already having wax printers, which for people coming from the casting background, which was my interest in the beginning was to create the foundry for the 21st century.
Yeah.
But it was then your introduction to Carl Bass in, I believe it was New Year's Eve or New Year's Day of 2007. Yeah, excuse me. So that opened up this idea that we pitched for the Digital Stone exhibition because we had it was really for me it was through the introduction to the Digital Stone project or the closing of the Seward Johnson. I think I was one of the last clients, but I was also one of the first people who was asked to come and set up the DSP. But it was Mr. Dusenberry's baby. But for the first time, I started thinking in terms of stone. And the Z-Core printers sort of lent themselves because they were more solid printers. They didn't do very well for small extensions like metal cast parts. But then you went to China, and I followed you by a month, I think, and you introduced me to the Dingley people, and we were both getting some of our first pieces, just bringing them 3D prints, essentially. And then that became the concept behind the Digital Stone exhibition.
I remember you and I invited Carl to lunch, and old as hell just proposed this thing to him.
Of course, the original idea was much bigger. It ended up being very impressive, and I'm very appreciative to this day. And I think maybe Carl Bass cashed in a few CEO chips back in those days. But we pitched an international exhibition. It was only supposed to start in China, and we ended up with four very impressive venues. Actually, three originally were approved, and the fourth one was generated by the venue itself. once they became aware of this traveling exhibition in China. It itself was rather groundbreaking for China. They they did include in our accompanying smaller exhibition the e-form of 3D prints and some animations, virtual sculpture animations. There were some Chinese artists who were already working in that who were included. But Tang Yao, who was our original project manager and eventually the curator, he went on for another couple of decades really promoting digital sculpture in China. And now it's to the point that every major art school, all the art academies, but also all of the Ivy League schools and many of the other polytechnics, it's really moving down throughout the whole area of China.
Well, I mean, the to to brag, the first exhibition of 3D printed sculpture was my show at Autodesk, and but that was done in combination with Stratasys because they printed them on their big machine, and so the first show of 3D printed sculptures, they were big because Stratasys would they printed them for me on their big machine that was, I mean, so the pieces in the first show of 3D printed sculptures were pretty good size, and that was again thanks to Carl and to Stratasys.
Yeah. And of course, one of the other ideas that we did pitch to them was a residency program, which Carl did actually end up setting up. Um, I would say that the people that he chose to run it, they opened it up to a larger group of people, which I think is potentially a positive thing, like architects and engineers. But the idea that it would be a kind of a powerhouse for artists themselves, it, it really didn't end up working that way.
Albert did one of those,
Oh,
but I agree with you. It didn't. Well, it you know, we're a more discrete unit as sculptors than a lot of people see. I mean, to us, you're a sculptor or not a sculptor. I mean, we don't have any sort of sculptors,
sure.
and but that's not fully understood. Others don't fully understand that.
Yes. It's quite apparent to me that not only when I go to China do I see that we've had such a huge impact on the educational system of artists throughout China. The same is true to a lot of universities throughout the United States that all really began with the ISC conferences and workshops.
Well, we set an attitude that the idea of uh, being generous with technical information.
What I find most interesting is that now it's the organization that I least expected, the National Sculpture Society, is actually picking up the ball and is showing much more interest in that technology and being much more open to a larger group of sculptors because it was always recognized as mainly just a figurative sculpture organization that they seem to be opening themselves up and are going to be well they did this AI conference in Indianapolis at Heron School of Art last September and where they also then backed me up for doing what I had wanted to do for 30 years was goes directly from a 3D digital file. And the first traditional part of the process was when the molten metal actually went into the mold, which had been itself 3D printed. So yeah, there was never an original, there was never any molds, no waxes, and even the refractory mold, which is almost always made by hand, was 3D printed itself. It was just a bunch of iron guys loading up some of their cupolas with broken up radiators that we've seen in operation for decades. We attended that first international iron conference in '87 at Schloss Furnaces in Birmingham, Alabama. And that's now a huge thing.
That cupola was big enough to hold meetings underneath it. I had never, ever known that it was anything that size.
Now, one of the more interesting things, when I look back, one of the first articles I wrote for Sculpture magazine was called Virtual Armatures, in which I was interviewing you and Rob Fisher and David Smalley. And one of the things I was talking about at the time was virtual sculpture itself, which, going back to that time period, none of you were actually very interested in at all.
No, I remember I was not, and you did a sort of a game uh, with virtual sculpture.
Yeah, so I was involved with that, but I find it very interesting now that you're involved with modeling in virtual reality. That's pretty significant.
Yes, but you know the thing is that just fit me perfectly. With people thought that that, and the reason that it fit me so perfectly is not the digital aspect.
The haptic.
Yes, and again the fact that I need to respond. I need to see it to respond. So to be able to make, I call them what ifs. But so I've made what ifs out of cardboard. I made them out of styrofoam and all. But making them out of light waves is the best of all. And until I take them out of virtual reality, they have no weight, and they hang around in space, and I can play with them and stretch them and all kinds of fun. Getting them out of VR is not trivial, but it's possible. And in fact, I think every piece in here.
I'm not sure which VR program you're using.
Kind of been customized for me.
Oh, okay. Because the one that Michael Walsh and I have been used is Medium, which was made by Oculus itself, and it actually produces OBJs and
Yes, but my problem with Medium is it's based on the sense of modeling,
right.
and I'm not a modeler.
So it's more like a design program.
Well, I mean, it's just there's a whole large percentage of sculptors are and continue to be modelers, and that's great. That's just that I'm not. So, the modeling physical metaphor of those programs just ain't me.
But what I find intriguing is that this was a traditional sculptor that he took on a project that was so big and would have been so costly that he ended up using 3D scanning, and they dressed up actors and family members, and they 3D scanned them, and then they were producing them. He was still going over with putting his final handwork in there, but digital sculpture has now completely, it's part of the whole thing. It's everywhere.
Sure. Well, the scanning, I understand the appeal of that. I didn't want to get, I was not trying to get things I made otherwise into 3D. I wanted to work in 3D, but you know, I mean, that's all. Everyone finds their way, and what works best for them or doesn't work for them. And
Yes.
one of the things that I found, though, to be an unexpected benefit of working on the computer, making sculptures on the computer, because I come out of the direct welding school. So if you're working on a piece and you try something and it's pretty interesting, but it doesn't work with the rest of it. If you're working directly, you either go that new direction or that new interesting thing that happened has to be ignored. But if you're working digitally, what I found, oh, you just save that. That little thing that didn't work well with the piece you're working on is the beginning of the next piece. And when you're working just directly with scrap, you can't keep an idea that doesn't work with the piece. You have to either go the new direction because you can't just suddenly double everything you had. But working with digitally, and I hadn't anticipated that, but then there are all these things sort of like waiting, come back to me sometime. And that has proved to be as important as all these other aspects we've spoken about.
Well, going back to the assemblage idea of working, what I've been finding in my own work is I've been digging up files that are sometimes 20 years old, and I had made permutations of things, and some things went someplace and some things didn't, or they looked interesting in the early part. I'm digging up those files and I'm picking up where I left off, but now with a whole lot more information. But now I'm even starting to put them all together and making assemblages digitally out of them.
Yeah.
And then they end up being 3D prints, and
Yeah.
there we go.
There we go.
So
What a path it's been, Robert.
yeah, my favorite guys from across the bay, long strange trip it's been. It's trucking.
Oh.
They go, long strange trip it's been.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Sorry. Oh.
yeah,
Yes.
it's
What a
one of
path.
those 60s references.
Yeah. Well, listen, I tell you, I consider myself a very lucky person. And I really mean luck. I was born with an affinity for shape. Call it a calling or what, but shape itself talks to me. As a kid, it was confusing. And when you're 7, at least I never knew how to explain like to my family. But I remember a trip we were on in somewhere in southern Utah. And I was 7 years old, and we passed a field that had a antique, large farm machinery, the kind of thing that would have been pulled by maybe, I don't know, a dozen horses, one of these really big, I think it was probably a harvester that also then maybe baled or something, but all of these different things that did. I mean, it was old, all weathered and all, and I was 7 years old, and I was the youngest member, and I had an older brother. But what I'm saying is that I didn't, as the youngest one, I was not the one that usually determined where we went. But I made the family car stop. And I just got out and I just looked at this thing. And fortunately, my mother took a picture because I remember it vividly. But the thing is that I didn't know how to explain. I mean, to the family, it was just a big old rusty thing. And I couldn't say that this was speaking to me in a powerful way. So what wonder what so this I say I'm a lucky guy having that. I did find a way to use that in life. I mean, it became my way of life. But I could have had a calling like that, but there wasn't any way to do anything with it. But so I had this calling, then I found it early. There was a profession in it that really helps. I mean, it was a difficult profession, but there was a name to it. It was called sculpture. And if I'd have been born 50 years earlier, it would have been figurative or nothing. And I respond to the figure in other work, but not mine. So I had this affinity I was born with. I found it. There was a support mechanism for it by pure good luck. Well, lucky guy. I don't, was not responsible for any of those things. So I think the thing I'll take credit for is grabbing onto it. I didn't let it slip away.
I remember when we were at that conference at Schloss Furnaces in Alabama in '87. Um, we were having a similar kind of conversation, and I brought up the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious, which you thought was complete bullshit.
Yes.
But see, when you talk like that, it tells me there's a thing in your head that's telling you that the universe is calling, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Or like the Blues Brothers, were on a mission from God.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We done it.
Bruce, hey man,
Hey, old friend.
ciao.